All right, let's talk about a piece of tech that is absolutely fundamental to modern networking, VLANs, or Virtual Local Area Networks. Now, we're not going to get lost in the weeds of command line configuration today. Nope. The goal here is to build a rock-solid mental model of what VLANs are, and maybe more importantly, why we even need them in the first place. Let's jump in.
So to really wrap our heads around this, let's start with a simple question. Just picture a school or maybe a growing company. What actually happens when every single device, every computer, every printer, every server, every phone is all plugged into one giant flat network? You know, at first it probably works okay, but as that place starts to grow, some serious problems start to bubble up to the surface.
And yeah, that's the heart of the issue, isn't it? A single network just doesn't scale well. What starts out as a nice, simple system quickly turns into total chaos, and that chaos creates real problems with performance, with security, and just with basic organization. Let's break down what's actually going wrong. First on the list is something called broadcast traffic. The best way to think about this is like someone making an announcement over a giant loudspeaker to an entire building. Some of this is totally necessary, like an ARP request, which is basically a device shouting, "Hey, I've got this IP address, who is it?" In a small office, no big deal. But in a network with hundreds or even thousands of devices, it's just constant shouting. And every single device has to stop what it's doing, listen to that broadcast, and figure out if it cares. It wastes their resources and it just bogs the whole network down for everyone.
Okay, now for problem number 2, and you could argue this one's even scarier: security. On that same flat network, you've got the HR department with all that sensitive employee data, you've got the finance team with the company's critical systems, and then you've got the public guest Wi-Fi. Without any separation, all these devices are in the same room, digitally speaking. They can all see each other. Think about that. A random person's phone on the guest network is on the same digital floor as your most secure servers. That's not just messy, it's a massive security risk just waiting to happen.
So the obvious solution is to separate these groups, right? And your first thought might be, well, let's just buy separate hardware for everybody. A switch for HR, a switch for IT, another one for the guests. But you can probably imagine that idea gets incredibly impractical incredibly fast.
And this chart just lays it out perfectly. Physical separation means buying more gear, running a spaghetti monster of cables. It costs a fortune, and it's a total nightmare to manage. What happens when an HR employee moves their desk to a different floor? Are you really going to run a new 200-foot cable all the way back to the special HR switch? No way. It just doesn't work. We need a smarter way. We need logical separation, not physical.
And boom, that is exactly where VLANs come into the picture. A VLAN is a way to logically, and that's the magic word here, logically group devices into different networks, even when they're all plugged into the same physical switch. It lets us build multiple virtual networks on top of one physical one.
So how does this actually look in the real world? Let's go back to our company example and see how VLANs clean up that chaotic free-for-all we were talking about. We can now create these really clear digital boundaries for each group.
This is how simple and clean it becomes. We just assign a unique number, a VLAN ID, to each group. So VLAN 10 is for HR, VLAN 20 is for IT, VLAN 30 is for our guests. Now, and this is the really cool part, even if an HR computer and a guest smartphone are plugged into ports right next to each other on the exact same switch, they might as well be in different buildings. They exist in completely separate digital worlds.
And this brings us right back to that first problem we talked about. Because these VLANs are separate worlds, any broadcast traffic from the HR department stays in the HR department's VLAN. The IT and guest networks, they are completely oblivious. They never even see it. The shouting is now contained within small, individual rooms instead of echoing through the entire building.
Okay, this next point is absolutely critical to get, because it's the #1 thing people get wrong about VLANs. Here's the deal. VLANs create separation. Full stop. They build walls. By default, they do not, I repeat, do not provide any way for devices in different VLANs to talk to each other. A computer in VLAN 10 has no idea that VLAN 20 even exists. VLANs are for isolation, not communication.
This brings us to what is truly the single most important concept of all. Seriously, if you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, make it this next point.
Let's just say it loud and clear. Each VLAN is its own broadcast domain. That's the technical, network engineer way of saying everything we've just discussed. It means the broadcasts, the shouting, it all hits the VLAN boundary and stops dead in its tracks. That's the secret sauce.
That's why performance gets better and why security gets so much tighter. The chaos is contained.
So when you put all these pieces together, it becomes really obvious why VLANs aren't just some nice-to-have feature. They are an absolutely essential, non-negotiable building block for basically every modern network that exists today.
This comparison really says it all, doesn't it? You're moving from a network that's brittle, insecure, and just plain chaotic to one that's scalable, secure, and efficient. It gives you the power to group devices based on what they do and their security needs instead of just where they happen to be plugged into the wall. It's a total game changer.
And because they're so powerful, you find VLANs literally everywhere. Your local school, massive corporate offices, sprawling data centers, even the cloud infrastructure that powers the internet. It's all built on this concept. They are the industry standard for a very, very good reason.
So if you're looking for that one simple takeaway to hang your hat on, here it is. VLANs build digital walls. They take a single, chaotic physical network and slice it up into multiple, orderly, and isolated virtual networks. They create order from the chaos.
Which, of course, leaves us with one final, fascinating question. We've established that VLANs are amazing at building these perfect digital walls. But what happens when you actually need communication between them? What if the finance team needs to access a server that lives in the IT VLAN? If VLANs build the walls, how in the world do you build the doors? Well, that sounds like a topic for another day.